They exiled the weak Vulpine princess. A human shows who she really is. HFY Story. The Vulpine Empire stretched across many bright systems, built on sharp laws and sharper teeth. Strength ruled everything. Size, speed, and the ability to dominate decided who mattered. Mercy was treated like weakness. Silence was treated like guilt. Princess Lyra was born into this empire, but from the first day, she did not fit. Her fur was pale instead of fiery red. Her frame was light. Her voice was calm. She did not bite when others expected her to. She watched, listened, and thought. The court whispered about her before she could even walk. They called her soft. They called her broken. Some said she should never have lived. Her parents were long gone, taken by war and duty. The throne passed to the council, and the council had no love for mistakes. As Lyra grew, she tried to learn what the empire valued. She trained until her muscles burned. She studied tactics and history late into the dark hours. She spoke carefully and followed every rule, but every effort only made the council more uneasy. They did not trust a princess who asked questions instead of demanding obedience. When a border war failed, they found their excuse. The defeat was not hers, but blame was useful. The council gathered in the high chamber, their eyes cold and ears alert to the murmurs of the nobles. They spoke of tradition. They spoke of purity. They spoke of sacrifice. Lyra stood alone in the center of the chamber as the sentence was read. Exile. No guard, no trial, no chance to speak. She was to be sent to a forgotten human world on the edge of known space. A place marked as dead after old wars poisoned its land. The council claimed it was mercy. Everyone knew it was a quiet execution. Lyra did not beg. She did not cry. She bowed her head and accepted the mark of exile burned into her wrist. The pain was sharp, but the silence after hurt more. Within a day, she was placed onto a small transport and sent away from the only world she had ever known. The ship dropped her near the surface and left without waiting for confirmation of life. The sky above the planet was gray and heavy. The air smelled of metal and dust. Broken towers stood in the distance like bones of giants. Wind moved through empty streets, carrying the sound of ghosts. Lyra collapsed onto the cracked ground. The council believed this world would finish what they started, but Lyra woke again. She crawled into the shadow of a fallen wall and stayed there through the cold night. Strange noises echoed across the land. Machines hummed far below the surface. She did not understand them, but she listened. On the second day, hunger burned in her stomach. On the third, thirst made her dizzy. She knew she would not last long if she stayed hidden. That was when a human found her. He was not a soldier. He carried no uniform and no symbols. His clothes were patched and worn. His hair was dark, his face tired, and his eyes sharp in a quiet way. He held a small tool in one hand and froze when he saw her. Lyra reached for a weapon she did not have. The human raised both hands slowly. "Easy," he said. His voice was calm. No fear, no anger. She waited for him to run or attack. He did neither. "You look hurt," he said. "Can you stand?" She did not answer. Her language device was damaged during landing. Still, she understood enough. He stepped back, giving her space, and placed a small container on the ground. Water. Lyra stared at it. Poison was common in the Empire. Trust was rare. The human took a drink first, then pushed it closer. "Name is Evan," he said. "You do not look like the raiders." She drank. The water was clean, cold, real. Her body shook as life returned to her limbs. Evan helped her to her feet and led her to his shelter beneath the ruins. It was small but warm, powered by old human machines patched together with care. Lights flickered but held. He gave her food. He gave her a place to rest. He did not ask who she was. Days passed. Lyra learned slowly. Evan survived by repairing scrap, growing food in poisoned soil using old methods, and avoiding attention. Humans, she learned, did not conquer this world. They endured it. When her device finally worked again, she told him only that she was cast out. He nodded. "Happens more than people think," he said. At night, Lyra watched the sky. She expected death to fall from it. She was right. On the seventh night, a small light blinked far above the clouds. Evan noticed it too. His face tightened. "That is not a star," he said. Lyra knew then. The Empire had checked. They had not forgotten her. Somewhere beyond the dark sky, machines were watching, calculating, waiting. Lyra clenched her hands. She was still alive, and that alone made her dangerous. Lyra woke before dawn, the gray light of the alien planet spilling through the cracks of the shelter. She felt hunger gnawing at her stomach, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had survived a week alone in a world that the Vulpine Empire called dead. That alone should have been impossible. Yet she was here. Evan moved quietly, preparing simple food. He had lived on this world for years, surviving among ruins and old human machines, never asking for help from anyone. His hands were steady though worn, and every movement seemed to follow a plan. Lyra watched him. Humans were small and weak in appearance, yet they endured. She realized she had been trained to see strength only as muscle and bite, but this man had survived far longer than any Vulpine soldier she had known. "You need to eat," Evan said, setting a thin loaf of baked root and a container of water in front of her. "You cannot think if you are empty." She nodded, careful not to reveal more than she intended. Her pride would not allow her to show weakness. But inside, a small spark of hope ignited. Perhaps life could be more than hiding, more than exile. Days turned into a week. Lyra learned to move through the ruins, to avoid the metal traps left behind by old wars, to read signs of weather and danger. Evan showed her how to collect water from rusted pipes, how to make a fire without sparks flying into poison dust, and how to repair old machines that seemed beyond repair. Lyra had never touched anything so delicate, so alive in its small way. She discovered patience, strategy, and careful observation, skills she had always had but never valued in the Empire. One evening, while checking a ruined building for salvageable parts, Lyra heard the faint hum of engines. She froze, every muscle alert. Evan came up beside her silently, following her gaze. "Hunters," he whispered. Lyra's heart skipped. The Empire had not forgotten her. Their hunters were not like soldiers. They were precision killers, trained to find and eliminate exiles before they could become a threat. She had survived the landing, the dead planet, hunger and cold, but she was not sure she could survive hunters. Evan moved first. He led her into the bowels of a half-collapsed building. "Stay quiet. Move only when I tell you," he said. His voice carried no fear, only calm certainty. The hum grew louder, closer. A small scouting drone appeared outside, its sensors sweeping the ruins. Lyra crouched, her tail pressed against her legs, and watched. She had no weapons, no army, only her mind and the human beside her. The drone paused, its eyes scanning the darkness. Lyra held her breath, trying to remain invisible. Evan bent low, picking up an old conduit and touching its wires. Sparks jumped. The light drew the drone's attention. It swerved slightly, confused, then continued its sweep. "They will find us if we do not act," Evan said. his hands steady on the device. But they do not understand the land. They see it dead. That is their weakness. Lyra watched as he manipulated the old human technology, setting traps and alarms. She understood now that survival was not about strength or bite. It was about knowing the land, knowing your tools, and using the enemy's assumptions against them. The first hunter arrived in the dark of night. He stepped carefully across the rubble, confident, powerful, and silent. He expected a weak, frightened exile, but what he found instead were pitfalls, hacked machinery, and moving shadows that vanished before he could aim. Lyra followed Evan's instructions, not as a soldier, but as a guide. She blocked corridors, misdirected the hunter, and led him into traps that snapped shut and pinned him without killing. She realized that her mind, trained to see weaknesses in others, could now protect life rather than destroy it. When the hunt ended, one hunter escaped to warn the Empire. Lyra and Evan remained, bruised but alive, their breaths heavy in the cold night. She looked at the human who had saved her, who had taught her that cleverness could be stronger than teeth, and something inside her shifted. The Empire would not forgive her. They would not accept that she could survive. But she was no longer the frightened exile they had sent away. She had learned to fight without killing, to outthink rather than overpower, to survive in a land that had been written off as dead. That night, Lyra looked up at the gray sky, at the faint glimmer of stars she had never seen before. She felt fear, yes, but also power. Not the power of claws and teeth, but the quiet, steady power of knowing she could endure anything. The council had called her weak, but weakness was a lie. Evan watched her silently as if he understood her thoughts. "You are stronger than you think," he said. Lyra nodded, feeling the truth in his words. They were alone, hunted, and the world beyond them was hostile. But for the first time, she believed that exile did not mean the end. Survival was just the beginning. From the shadows of the ruined city, distant lights blinked. Other drones, other hunters, the Empire keeping watch. Lyra felt the weight of their gaze, and yet she did not flinch. She had survived the impossible before, and she could do it again. The quiet of the human frontier taught her something no Vulpine tutor ever had. Strategy, patience, and cleverness could turn even the smallest being into something dangerous. The Empire would come for her. They would think they could finish what they started, but they had underestimated the human beside her, and they had underestimated the princess they had called weak. And Lyra knew, as she stared into the dark horizon, that the world they had sent her to die on might be the same world where she would rise stronger than anyone imagined. The gray morning light seeped through the cracks in the ruined walls as Lyra stretched her stiff limbs. The last hunt had ended, but the memory of the hunter's precision haunted her. She had survived, yet each encounter reminded her that the Empire would not rest. The Council would never forgive the failure they had sent her to die for. Evan moved around the shelter quietly, checking the traps they had set. His calmness was a shield against the storm that approached. Lyra watched him work. Humans were strange creatures, small, fragile in appearance, yet able to endure in ways the Empire could never understand. Strength was not only teeth and claws, it could be patience, calculation, and cleverness. She realized that the lesson the Empire had never taught her might save her life now. Weeks passed. Lyra learned the rhythm of the world around her, the timing of storms, the whisper of wind through broken towers, the faint pulse of old machines under the sand. Evan taught her how to repair, how to hide, how to move silently without leaving a trace. She was no longer a frightened exile. She was a shadow, a thinker, a survivor. One night the wind carried a new sound, a distant hum, low and steady. Lyra froze, ears pricked. She had learned to recognize the difference between wind, machine, and threat. This was the sound of hunters returning. Not one, not a small scout, but a full team. The Empire had not given up. They had sent their best to finish what they had started. Evan came to her side, eyes sharp. "They will not see you," he whispered. "Move as I say. Trust the traps." Lyra nodded. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. This was no longer about fear. This was about strategy. She moved with Evan, placing themselves in the corridors and narrow passages of the ruined city. Every trap, every rusted machine, every shadow was a weapon in their hands. The hunters arrived under the cover of darkness, expecting an easy kill. They had been briefed. The exile was weak, a pale shadow of a princess, no threat. They found instead a maze of pitfalls, hacked machines, and clever distractions. Lyra had studied the patterns of the land, the devices Evan used, and her own instincts. She guided the hunters step by step into the traps. One hunter fell into a pit of sharpened metal rods. Another was caught in a net of wires that tightened as he struggled. The smallest human ingenuity turned their strength into a weakness. Lyra did not need to fight. She only needed to guide, to think, to anticipate. By the time the hunt ended, only one hunter escaped. He limped away through the darkness, carrying the message back to the Empire. Lyra and Evan remained, bruised but alive, their breaths visible in the cold night. The quiet of the ruins settled around them, and for a moment they allowed themselves to rest. But rest was temporary. Lyra understood now that survival alone would not protect her. The Council would send more hunters, more machines, more firepower. They feared her survival, and fear made them dangerous. She had survived the landing, the dead planet, hunger, cold, and even skilled hunters. What she had not yet faced was the full weight of the Empire. Evan spoke softly as they repaired the traps and patched the machines. "They will return," he said. "We need to prepare, or we die next time." Lyra nodded, determination hardening inside her. She had been called weak all her life, sent away to die because of it. Now she understood the truth. Weakness was not her nature. It was the Empire's lie. Her mind, her patience, and her ability to learn were her real weapons. The Empire had underestimated her. An underestimation could be deadly. The next days were filled with preparation. Lyra and Evan worked tirelessly, improving traps, learning the terrain, and studying the patterns of the enemy. Lyra observed Evan, mimicking his methods, understanding the logic behind each move. She realized that humans had survived for centuries not by overpowering their enemies, but by being clever, adaptable, and patient. One evening, while scouting the edges of the ruins, Lyra saw the glint of metal on the horizon. Ships were moving through the clouds, small at first, then larger as they drew closer. The Empire was sending more than hunters this time. They were sending warships, machines designed to crush resistance without mercy. Lyra's heart did not falter. She turned to Evan, who was already analyzing the approach. "They will attack soon," he said. "We have time to prepare, but not much." Lyra studied the terrain, the ruined buildings, and the old human machines buried under the sand. She realized that survival now required more than hiding. They needed to fight, to outthink, and to show the hunters that the exile they had sent away was no longer weak. The first ships appeared in the sky, engines glowing like cold fire. Lyra led Evan to the central ruins, where old human technology could be repaired and used. They worked together, setting defenses, preparing traps, and making use of every machine they could salvage. When the first hunters landed, they were met with a world they did not understand. Every step was dangerous. Every shadow could hide a trap. Lyra moved among them, silent and invisible, guiding the hunters into the devices she and Evan had prepared. The battle lasted for hours. Machines failed, traps snapped shut, and the hunters realized too late that the exile was no longer defenseless. Lyra did not fight with claws or teeth. She fought with intelligence, with careful planning, and with a patience that the hunters could not match. By dawn, the ruins were quiet. Only one hunter survived to report back to the Empire. Lyra and Evan stood among the wreckage, bruised and tired, but alive. The Empire now knew the truth. The so-called weak princess had survived, and she was dangerous. Lyra looked at Evan, gratitude and determination mixing in her gaze. She had learned much from him, not just survival skills, but the value of patience, strategy, and intelligence. The Empire had sent her to die, but she had learned to live, and now she was ready for the challenges to come. The gray sky above hinted at storms, and distant engines warned of more hunters. But Lyra no longer feared them. She had faced the impossible and survived. The Empire had underestimated her, and the princess who had been called weak knew that her journey was only beginning. She would not die quietly. She would not surrender. Well, the Vulpine Empire had sent her away to fade into nothing. But she was still here, learning, planning, and growing stronger. And when the time came, she would show them all that weakness had been a lie. Lyra and Evan moved among the ruins, preparing for the next encounter. The Empire would return, but they would find that the princess they had called weak was no longer afraid. She had survived hunters, storms, and exile. Now she was ready to face the full weight of the Empire. And she would not be alone. The sun rose over the dead world, casting long shadows across the ruins. Lyra felt a strange sense of hope. Survival was no longer enough. She was learning to fight in ways the Empire had never imagined. The weak princess had become something new, something dangerous, something that could change everything. And somewhere far above, in the dark corridors of the Vulpine fleet, the Council learned that their exile had failed. The message brought by the last surviving hunter was clear. The princess was alive, she was clever, and she was no longer weak. The sky changed color before the fleet arrived. The gray clouds turned dark, heavy with electric light. Lyra felt it before she saw it. The air itself seemed tense, like it was holding its breath. Evan stood on the highest broken tower, using an old scope made from scraps. His jaw tightened. "They are not hunters this time," he said. "They brought ships, many ships." Lyra climbed beside him and looked through the scope. Her heart sank, but her mind stayed calm. Large shapes moved above the clouds, slow and confident. These were not here to search. They were here to erase. The Vulpine Empire had decided the truth was too dangerous. They would burn this world if needed. "They think humans will run," Evan said. "They always think that." Lyra remembered her lessons from the Empire. Fear was a tool. Overwhelming force was meant to break will before battle even began. The Council believed that humans were scattered, weak, and divided. They were wrong. Evan activated an old transmitter buried deep in the ruins. Its signals spread across the planet, bouncing off satellites that humans had left behind long ago. Lyra did not fully understand the technology, but she understood its purpose. It was a call. Not for help, for warning. Across nearby human worlds, signals lit up. Old codes came alive. Farmers, traders, mechanics, and wanderers stopped what they were doing and looked at the sky. They had seen these signs before. They knew what they meant. War was coming. The first shots did not hit the ground. The Vulpine fleet fired into empty air, destroying old ruins and abandoned structures. It was a message: surrender or be erased. No one answered. Hours passed. Then something unexpected happened. Human ships began to arrive. They were not impressive at first glance. Some were patched together from mining vessels. Others were old cargo ships refitted with weapons. They came from different directions, unorganized at first, then slowly forming patterns. Lyra watched in silence as more signals appeared on Evan's screen. "They came fast," she said quietly. Evan smiled just a little. Humans do not need orders to protect each other. The Vulpine commanders hesitated. This was not part of their plan. Humans were not supposed to unite. They were supposed to scatter. The first real battle began without warning. A human ship darted forward, smaller and faster than expected. It released a burst of energy that disabled the shields of a larger Vulpine vessel. Another human ship followed, striking the exposed engine. The Vulpine ship drifted, dead in space. Silence filled the channel. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, pride. The Empire had taught her that humans were weak because they lacked unity. What she saw instead was flexible cooperation. No central command, no rigid structure, just shared purpose. On the ground, Vulpine landing teams descended into the ruins. This time, Lyra did not hide. She moved. She guided human defenders through hidden paths, warned them of enemy movement, and predicted Vulpine tactics before they happened. She knew how her people fought. She knew their pride would blind them. It did. Vulpine soldiers advanced in tight formations, confident in their strength. Humans struck from unexpected angles, using terrain, traps, and speed. Old machines came alive under Evan's guidance, turning the ruins into a living defense system. The ground shook. Smoke filled the air. The dead world screamed with life again. During a brief pause, Evan looked at Lyra. "They need to know who you are," he said. She hesitated. Her whole life, her title had been a chain, a reason to be hated, a reason to be exiled. But hiding now would cost lives. Lyra stepped onto an open channel. Her image appeared across human and Vulpine networks alike. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice steady. "Daughter of the Vulpine Empire, exiled as weak, sent here to die." Murmurs spread across channels. "I survived because humans showed me what strength really is," she continued. "You fight to dominate. Humans fight to protect. That is why you are afraid." The Vulpine Council tried to cut the signal. They failed. "You fear me because I did not break," Lyra said. "And you fear humans because they do not kneel." The signal ended. For a moment, even the battle seemed to pause. Then the Empire attacked with full force. The sky burned. Energy fire rained down. Human ships were lost. Human ground teams fell back. The Vulpine fleet pushed forward, using sheer numbers. Lyra felt the weight of it. Strategy could only do so much. Sacrifice was coming. During an evacuation of a human settlement near the ruins, Evan stayed behind to hold a control node active. Lyra warned him the enemy was closing in. "I know," he said calmly. "Someone has to stay." The node powered the shields protecting thousands of civilians. Vulpine soldiers broke through. Evan fought with tools, not weapons. He delayed them, rerouted systems, and locked doors. But eventually they reached him. When the shields held and the last transport escaped, Evan was taken. Lyra felt it like a blade in her chest. The council broadcast a message soon after. "Return to the Empire," the voice said. "Deny the humans. Kneel the human lives." Lyra stood among human fighters, smoke rising around them. All eyes turned to her. The Empire had played its final card. Lyra closed her eyes. Then she opened them. "No," she said. The channel went silent. The Empire did not understand her answer. They thought love was weakness. They thought attachment was control. They did not understand humans, and they did not understand her. Lyra turned to the human commanders around her. "They will break him," one said quietly. "Or kill him," another added. Lyra shook her head. "Not yet. They want me alive. That is their mistake." She looked at the map of the enemy fleet and the central command ship where Evan was being held. "We are not retreating," she said. "We are going forward." Some stared at her in shock. Others smiled. A human pilot stepped forward. "Tell us how." Lyra took a breath. For the first time, she was not in exile. She was a leader, and the Empire had just taught her exactly where to strike. Far above, the Vulpine Council watched the battle turn against them in ways they could not predict. Humans fought without fear of hierarchy. The princess they had discarded now stood at the center of resistance. Their greatest mistake was clear. They had tried to erase a life. Instead, they had created a symbol. And the war was far from over. The war did not slow after Lyra's refusal. It grew heavier, darker, and louder. The Vulpine fleet tightened its hold on the sky, cutting supply routes and forcing human ships to scatter. Every hour brought new losses. Fires burned across the ruined world, and the air smelled of metal and ash. Lyra stood in a command shelter built from old human steel plates and broken walls. Screens flickered around her, showing maps, signals, and warning signs. Human leaders moved in and out, tired but focused. No one questioned why she stood at the center now. She saw patterns others missed. She knew how the enemy thought. But her thoughts kept returning to Evan. He was alive. She knew this because the council wanted her to know. They sent images, short and cruel. Evan restrained, bruised, but still standing. He did not beg. He did not look broken. That made the council angry. They sent another message. "Surrender," the council said. "Return to your place. Deny the humans. The human survives." Lyra watched the screen without speaking. Around her, humans waited. Some looked away, knowing what the choice cost. Others watched her closely, not judging, but trusting. She turned off the screen. "They think pain will control me," she said calmly. "They think love is weakness." A human commander spoke softly. "They are wrong." Lyra nodded. "But they believe it, and belief makes them careless." She leaned over the map and pointed to a cluster of enemy ships. "They moved their command core here. They believe it is untouchable." "It is heavily guarded," someone said. "That is why Evan is there," Lyra replied. "They want me to come alone." She looked around the room. "I will not." The plan was risky. It had to be. Humans prepared a strike that looked like retreat. Ships pulled back. Signals went quiet. The Vulpine fleet advanced, confident that fear had finally won. It had not. Hidden human vessels slipped through blind spots created by damaged satellites. Old ships powered by silent engines moved like shadows. Lyra traveled with them, not as royalty, but as a guide. During the journey, she sat alone in the dim light of the ship. Doubt tried to creep in. Doubt? If she failed, Evan would die. Many others might die with him. The Empire would tighten its grip on the stars. She remembered the day of her exile. The cold floor, the quiet judgment, the way no one met her eyes. she would not kneel again. The strike began with confusion. Human ships appeared where the enemy did not expect them. They did not attack directly. They disabled sensors, cut power lines, and turned the fleet's own systems against itself. Inside the command ship, alarms rang. Evan heard them from his cell. He lifted his head slowly. The guards cursed and rushed past him. He smiled, just a little. He knew that sound. Lyra's team breached the outer hull using old human tools the Empire had never bothered to study. Inside, corridors twisted and locked. Lyra led the way, predicting guard movements and trap placements before they happened. They moved fast, quiet, focused. When they reached Evan, the guards were already gone, called away by a larger threat. Evan looked up as the door opened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You took your time," he said, weak but smiling. Lyra knelt beside him and cut his restraints. "You said someone had to stay," she replied. "You did your part. They did not celebrate. There was no time." As they escaped, the Vulpine fleet realized the truth. This was not a rescue. It was a lesson. Human ships struck the command core, not to destroy it, but to expose it. Channels opened across the Empire. Citizens saw the Council hiding behind shields, sacrificing worlds, lying about strength and honor. Lyra spoke again, not as a princess asking for mercy, but as a voice of truth. "They told you strength means cruelty," she said. "They told you weakness must be erased. Look where that led." Some Vulpine ships hesitated. Some turned away. Not all, but enough. The Council screamed orders. Too late. Human forces withdrew, carrying Evan and others with them. They did not chase victory. They took something more valuable, the truth. In the quiet after the escape, Lyra sat beside Evan in the medical bay. He slept, breathing slowly. She watched him, exhaustion finally reaching her. A human officer approached. "They are regrouping," he said. "This is not over." Lyra nodded. "No, but it has changed." She stood and looked at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, the Empire was cracking. Not from force alone, but from doubt. The Council had tried to break her with exile, then with fear, then with love turned into a weapon. They failed every time. Lyra knew the final confrontation was coming. The Empire would not survive with the truth spreading. They would strike one last time, harder than before. And when they did, she would be ready, not as the weak princess they cast out, but as something they never planned for, an ally of humans, and a threat to everything they believed. The stars were cold and distant as Lyra stood on the bridge of the rebuilt human vessel. Evan was beside her, recovering but alert, his eyes scanning the data on the flickering displays. The Vulpine Empire had gathered its remaining fleets, determined to end what they called a rebellion. They did not see it coming, but Lyra had anticipated every move, every prideful mistake. Her mind ran through the plans. Every planet, every fleet position, every weak point she had learned during exile. The humans had listened, learned, and acted faster than the Empire had ever expected. Lyra was no longer a weak princess. She was the guide, the strategist, and the symbol. The Vulpine fleet appeared on the horizon, a massive wall of metal and fire. Their engines blazed like cold suns, their ships casting shadows that stretched for miles across space. The Council believed their numbers would crush any resistance. They had not counted on unity, on patience, on intelligence. Evan leaned toward her. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded, calm. They believe power comes from fear. They do not understand that strength can be patience, cleverness, and cooperation. The first wave of attack came quickly. Vulpine energy beams cut through space, striking old colonies, small human supply ships, and debris fields. Human ships dodged and countered, using old mining engines and ancient weapons refurbished with cunning modifications. Lyra guided them through every maneuver, predicting the Vulpine fleet's assumptions before they acted. They reached the heart of the enemy formation. The command ship floated like a fortress, its shields bright and strong. Inside, the council watched, unaware that their greatest weapon, fear of the princess, was already gone. Lyra opened the transmission channel. "This is Lyra," she said. Her voice carried over every system, every ship. "Exiled, called weak, left to die. I survived because humans taught me what strength really is. And now I will show you the truth." The council froze. Some laughed, thinking she would beg. Others trembled, sensing the threat behind her words. "You built your empire on lies," she continued. "You called weakness shame. You thought fear would control me. Look at what your empire has created instead. Humans do not bow, and I do not kneel." The Vulpine ships faltered. Some turned away, unsure of their orders. Doubt crept through the fleet, fueled by the courage of humans they had always seen as weak. Inside the command ship, alarms rang. Humans had infiltrated systems, disabled communications, and exposed the Council's lies. Citizens across the Empire began to see the truth. Their leaders hid behind fear and power while sending innocents to die. Lyra gave the order. Human forces struck in precision, not to destroy, but to control the battlefield. She moved with care, guiding ships, avoiding unnecessary deaths, and targeting systems that would shatter the Council's authority. Every action was calculated, every move predictable to the humans, unpredictable to the Vulpine. At the center, Evan piloted a strike craft, moving through shields that had been thought impenetrable. Lyra directed him remotely, her voice steady and precise. He reached the central core, where he had been imprisoned before. With a steady hand, he disabled the core, cutting the Council's control over their fleet. Panic spread through the Empire. Ships spun out of control. Soldiers abandoned posts. The Council attempted to rally, but the humans and their allies were everywhere, not in mass, but in intelligence, adaptability, and courage. The final confrontation came when the Council tried to escape to a hidden command station. Lyra intercepted them with a small human fleet, not to destroy them, but to corner them. She transmitted her final words. "You judged me weak. You exiled me. You sent me to die. Look at your empire now, broken by your fear, not by my strength. I am not weak, and your empire will no longer hide behind lies." The Council's faces twisted with rage and disbelief. Lyra turned her attention to the fleet. "Leave this place, change, or crumble. The choice is yours." Silence fell. Then, one by one, the ships turned away. Some fled, some surrendered. The empire was fractured, no longer whole, no longer untouchable. Lyra walked through the human vessel later, looking at the people who had stood beside her. They were small in appearance, fragile to the Vulpine eye, but their courage, intelligence, and cooperation had reshaped the galaxy. Evan joined her, still tired, still bruised. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," Lyra replied. She looked out at the stars, at the distant Vulpine worlds that would now reconsider their choices. This is only the beginning. For the first time, she felt the weight of her life without chains. No longer a weak princess, no longer exiled, no longer silenced. She had survived, and in surviving, she had changed everything. Across the galaxy, humans and allies celebrated, rebuilt, and prepared for a future no longer dominated by fear. Lyra stood among them, not a ruler but a symbol, a reminder that strength was not only measured in teeth, claws, or firepower, but in intelligence, courage, and the refusal to be broken. The stars shone cold and distant, but Lyra no longer feared them. She had faced the impossible, survived exile, defeated a cruel empire, and shown what humans, and even those the empire called weak, could accomplish. The galaxy would remember this day, and the Vulpine Empire would remember her. Lyra turned to Evan. "The future is ours to shape," Evan smiled. "And we will shape it together," Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of it. Together, humans and those cast aside by the Empire could survive, adapt, and rise stronger than ever imagined. The weak princess was no more. She was a legend in the making, and the galaxy had only just begun to understand her power. And somewhere far away, the Council would learn that underestimating life, patience, and intelligence could be far more dangerous than any fleet.